I didn't even see her face clearly before the door slammed shut. The sound echoed through the porch, like a gunshot, sharp and final. I heard the metal slide, then the unmistakable click of the chain being fastened from the inside. My mother's voice cut through the Christmas music behind the door, cold and deliberate. This house is only for those who know how to obey and respect their mother. Respect. I stood there frozen, my hand still hovering in the air, my breath turning white in the snow. Respect, she said, as if the years I spent carrying her bills, her hospital forms, her emergencies, her late-night panic calls, none of that counted as love. None of that counted as respect. My name is Naomi Carter. I'm 31 years old, and I work as a senior communication strategist for a consulting firm in Seattle, Washington. On paper, my life looks stable, even impressive. I live alone, I pay my own bills, I've built a career from the ground up. What no one at work knows is that for years, I was also quietly supporting a household 4 states away. I rarely went back to Pine Hollow, Montana. It's a small town where everyone knows your last name and never forgets your childhood mistakes. I left the moment I could, but I never truly escaped. My mother, Evelyn Carter, had a way of pulling me back without ever asking directly. A forwarded email about a billing error, a voicemail about insurance paperwork she didn't understand, a text from my younger sister, Mara, saying Mom was stressed and I was the only one who could help. So I helped, over and over again. That Christmas, I drove through a snowstorm to Pine Hollow with a single purpose. I wasn't asking for gratitude. I wasn't asking for money. I brought a white envelope containing every medical bill, utility payment, and emergency transfer I'd covered in the past year, nearly $20,000. I just wanted my mother to see it, to acknowledge that I wasn't selfish, that I hadn't abandoned her. The house looked warm when I pulled up, lights glowing in every window, music spilling into the yard, laughter. For a moment, I thought maybe this time would be different. Evelyn opened the door and looked at the envelope in my hands before she looked at my face. Her expression changed instantly. "So this is why you came," she said flatly, "to ask for more." Before I could respond, she stepped aside, and I saw Mara inside, sitting on the couch with her boyfriend. A gold bracelet flashed on her wrist when she lifted her glass. Brand new, expensive. She smiled at me like we were strangers at a party. I tried to explain. I told my mother the envelope wasn't a request. It was proof. Proof of everything I'd done quietly, without complaint. Proof that I cared. She didn't open it. Instead, her voice rose, sharp enough to cut through the music. She accused me of being ungrateful, of thinking I was better than them because I lived in the city. Mara chimed in casually, saying maybe I should stop keeping score if I truly loved our mother. That was when Evelyn reached for the door. I remember the exact moment it closed, the exact second the chain slid into place, and the words she chose to seal it. "This house is only for those who know how to obey and respect their mother." Then silence. I stood there alone on the porch, snow soaking into my coat, listening to the muffled sound of Christmas continuing without me. I realized something terrifying in that moment. I wasn't being punished for doing too little. I was being punished for finally wanting to be seen. That night marked the end of the daughter they thought they had, and the beginning of a truth they never expected to face. Before I go on, let me ask you something. As you're listening to this right now, where are you listening from? What city? What country? Let me know. Because this story, as personal as it is, might sound uncomfortably familiar no matter where you are. I had only taken 3 steps down the porch when the sound of tires crunching over snow broke the silence behind me. At first, I didn't turn around. Pine Hollow wasn't known for surprises, especially not on Christmas night, but the headlights cut across the yard, bright and deliberate, stopping just short of the porch steps. A black luxury sedan idled there, engine steady, expensive, out of place in a town where pickup trucks ruled and everyone noticed anything unfamiliar. The driver's door opened. The man who stepped out moved slowly, not from weakness, but from control. He wore a dark wool coat, tailored, the kind that held its shape even in falling snow. When he lifted his head, the porch light caught his face, and something deep in my chest tightened in a way I couldn't immediately explain. I knew that face. Or at least, I knew the photographs of it. The ones my mother used to keep locked away in a drawer she never opened when she thought I was watching. "Naomi," he said calmly. My name in his mouth felt unreal, like it didn't belong in the cold air between us. Richard Hale, my grandfather, the man my family said had died more than a decade ago in a boating accident off the coast. The man whose name was never spoken without tension, whose existence had been reduced to a closed chapter. Everyone agreed not to reopen. "You're supposed to be dead," I said, before I could stop myself. A faint smile touched his mouth, but there was no warmth in it. That's what made it easier to see clearly. He didn't hug me. He didn't apologize for the years of silence. He looked past me once toward the front door of the house, where Christmas music was still playing faintly through the walls. Then he said the sentence that would echo in my head for weeks. "There will be an audit tonight." I didn't have time to ask what he meant. My phone vibrated violently in my coat pocket. Once, then again. I looked down and saw a flood of notifications stacking on my screen, all marked urgent. Bank alerts, security warnings. A subject line in bold letters froze my breath. "Commercial loan activity detected." I opened the message, my fingers numb, my mind lagging behind the words as they loaded. My name appeared where it shouldn't have been, attached to a financial instrument I had never authorized. A commercial mortgage. High six figures. My professional credentials listed as collateral. My digital signature replicated with terrifying accuracy. "I didn't sign this," I whispered, more to myself than to him. "I know," Richard said evenly. "That's why I came tonight." The realization hit me in waves, each one heavier than the last. This wasn't just a mistake. It wasn't a misunderstanding. Someone had used my identity deliberately, with planning, with access, and with confidence that they wouldn't be questioned. Behind the locked door, laughter rose and fell unaware, or worse, indifferent. I looked at Richard, my heart pounding so loudly I could hear it in my ears. "How long has this been happening?" His gaze stayed fixed on the house. "Longer than you think. Long enough that ignoring it would have been negligence." I wanted to scream, to pound on the door, to demand explanations. But the part of me that had survived boardrooms and crisis calls understood something instinctively. Panic would cost me more than silence ever had. "I need to leave," I said, my voice shaking despite my effort to steady it. Richard nodded once. "You should. Tonight isn't for confrontation. It's for documentation." As I walked toward my car, the weight of the moment settled fully into my chest. I had come to Pine Hollow hoping to be seen as a daughter. I was leaving as something else entirely, a liability someone had been willing to sacrifice. I drove out of town under falling snow, the road stretching endlessly ahead of me. My phone continued to buzz with alerts I didn't yet have the courage to open. Each mile put distance between me and the house, but none between me and the truth pressing in on all sides. By the time Pine Hollow disappeared in my rearview mirror, one thing was painfully clear. This wasn't just betrayal. This was a calculated move, and whoever made it believed I wouldn't fight back. Seattle greeted me with rain instead of snow, the kind that soaked into everything without making a sound. I went straight from the airport to my apartment, dropped my bag by the door, and opened my laptop before I even took my coat off. Whatever had been set in motion back in Pine Hollow wasn't emotional. It was procedural. That realization changed how I moved next. I stopped being a daughter the moment I crossed the city line. I became an analyst again. I began with the bank alerts, one by one, slow and methodical. The commercial mortgage wasn't the only anomaly. There were credit inquiries I didn't recognize, accounts opened under my name, but routed through addresses I hadn't lived at in years, and a pattern that made my stomach tighten as it came into focus. None of this had been rushed. Someone had been careful. Someone had known exactly where to look. By dawn, my dining table was covered with printouts. The breakthrough came when I pulled records tied to what my mother always called the Family Emergency Fund. I had created that account years ago after a hospital scare she insisted would ruin her if I didn't help. I was the only contributor. Every deposit came from my salary, my bonuses, my reimbursements. I had never thought to question access because trust had been assumed, not earned. That assumption cost me more than money. The account wasn't dormant between emergencies. It was active, constantly, charges stacked neatly in categories that had nothing to do with medicine or utilities. 5-star spa retreats in Arizona, first-class flights to Miami, jewelry purchases that matched the bracelet I'd seen on Mara's wrist, social club dues, boutique hotel reservations under my mother's email address. I followed the paper trail deeper and found the mechanism that made it all possible: a financial power of attorney. My name was on it. My signature was on it too, copied flawlessly from older documents I had signed years earlier, layered digitally, and authenticated through channels that required access only my mother would have had. The date on the document predated the largest withdrawals by just weeks. This wasn't desperation, it was strategy. Once I saw it, everything else fell into place with disturbing clarity. The timing of the guilt-laced messages, the insistence that I handle paperwork remotely, the way my mother always positioned herself as overwhelmed, incapable, dependent. It hadn't been chaos, it had been camouflage. I looped in a forensic accountant by mid-morning, careful with my language, precise with my questions. By afternoon, she confirmed what I already knew, but needed validated. The documents had been manipulated. The access was unauthorized. The exposure to my professional assets was real. Late that evening, Richard called. His voice was steady, unchanged, as if none of this surprised him. He didn't ask how I was holding up. He asked what I had found, and I told him everything, leaving nothing out. When I finished, there was a pause on the line, long enough to register as intentional. "They activated it," he said finally. I asked him what he meant, and for the first time, he explained what had always existed quietly in the background of my family's life. The Hale Family Trust wasn't just an inheritance structure, it was a filter. Decades earlier, after watching patterns repeat across generations, Richard had written in a clause most attorneys would call excessive. Any beneficiary who used fraud, coercion, or familial obligation to extract financial gain from another would trigger an immediate freeze. No appeals, no discretion, no exceptions made in the name of blood. The trust didn't punish mistakes. It punished intent. Richard hadn't vanished to escape responsibility. He had stepped away to see who people became when they thought no one was watching. As he spoke, I pulled the trust documents he sent over into a separate folder, scanning the language carefully. The clause was unambiguous. It didn't require court interpretation. It required evidence, and that evidence was now neatly cataloged on my table. My family hadn't been unlucky. They had been precise, confident, and convinced that the cost would land somewhere else. By the time the call ended, the rain outside had slowed to a mist, clinging to the windows like residue. The files were backed up. The timelines aligned. The signatures told the same story from multiple angles. There was no longer any doubt about what had happened or how long it had been in motion. By the end of that week, my life was no longer measured in days, but in filings, deadlines, and timestamps. The attorney I hired didn't come recommended through friends. She came recommended through results. Her name was Elena Brooks, and the first thing she did after reviewing my documents was close her folder slowly and look straight at me. "This isn't messy," she said. "It's deliberate. That actually makes it easier." We didn't waste time. Within 48 hours, she executed what she called a containment strategy. The forged power of attorney was challenged and suspended pending investigation. My credit was frozen across all bureaus. The commercial mortgage filing was flagged as fraudulent and placed under review. Every account tied to the so-called Family Emergency Fund was locked down before another dollar could move. For the first time in years, the money stopped flowing outward. The evidence came together faster than I expected, not because it was scarce, but because it was everywhere. Bank statements showed patterns that told their own story. Withdrawals always followed my deposits, often within days. Luxury charges appeared in clusters, timed around holidays and social events. When Elena's team cross-checked those charges with public posts, the matches were undeniable. Photos of spa weekends, airport lounges, a champagne bottle held up to a camera, time-stamped within hours of a withdrawal. The digital trail was even cleaner. IP logs tied repeated transactions to the same residential network in Pine Hollow. Not a cafe, not a shared space. My mother's house. There was no ambiguity left to argue over intent. When the hearing date was set, I flew back, not to Pine Hollow, but to a federal building an hour away. The room was smaller than I expected, colder too, stripped of anything personal. I sat at one table with Elena. Across from us sat Evelyn and Mara, close enough that I could see the tension in my sister's jaw, the way my mother kept adjusting her coat as if comfort could still be negotiated. They didn't look at me. Their attorney opened with emotion. He spoke about family pressure, about generational expectations, about a mother overwhelmed and a daughter trying to keep up. He framed the transactions as misunderstandings, painted me as distant, successful, unaware of the strain my absence caused. When it was our turn, Elena didn't raise her voice. She laid out the documents in sequence: the forged authorization, the transaction logs, the matching IP addresses, the correlation between deposits and discretionary spending. She didn't accuse. She demonstrated. The shift in the room was subtle but irreversible. Evelyn finally spoke, her voice breaking as she described sacrifices she believed she had made. She talked about raising 2 daughters alone, about fear, about survival. Mara followed, claiming she never knew where the money came from, that she assumed I had offered it willingly. Elena asked one question: "Did either of you disclose these transactions to Naomi Carter at the time they occurred?" Silence answered for them. The ruling didn't come with drama. It came with clarity. The judge ordered the immediate and permanent freeze of the accounts in question. Full restitution of more than $200,000 was mandated, subject to recovery proceedings. A no-contact order was issued, barring both Evelyn and Mara from reaching out to me directly or indirectly. Mara was placed under mandatory financial oversight, pending further review. When the gavel came down, I didn't feel relief. I felt something closer to gravity returning to its proper place. Outside the courtroom, reporters waited, drawn by the unusual mix of family and finance. I declined to comment. There was nothing to explain that documents hadn't already said more precisely than words ever could. Evelyn passed me in the hallway without stopping. Mara hesitated, as if she might speak, then thought better of it and followed their attorney out the door. I stayed behind long enough to sign the final paperwork, then walked out alone. What collapsed that day wasn't a family bond. That had eroded long before. What collapsed was a story they had relied on, the one where obligation replaced consent and silence passed for agreement. The legal system didn't take sides, it followed evidence, and the evidence told a version of the truth that no amount of familiarity could soften. The restaurant had been standing longer than most of the people inside it. Dark wood panels lined the walls, polished by decades of hands and history. Candlelight softened every sharp edge, yet nothing about the atmosphere felt warm. Snow pressed against the windows, muting the town outside, as if Pine Hollow itself were holding its breath. Richard sat at the head of the table, composed, precise, unreadable. Across from him were Evelyn and Mara. I took the seat beside him, not because I wanted protection, but because it felt like the correct geometry of truth. No one smiled. No one touched the bread. Richard broke the silence without ceremony. "I want each of you to write one sentence," he said evenly. "Define what fairness means to you. Nothing more, nothing less." A waiter placed 3 cards and 3 pens on the table. The scratch of ink filled the room. Evelyn wrote first. Her hand moved quickly, confidently. When she slid the card forward, her chin lifted as if she had already won. "Family must come above everything." Mara hesitated longer. She glanced at me once, then back at her card, carefully shaping each letter. "Everyone deserves a second chance." I was the last to write. I didn't rush, and I didn't look up when I finished. "Return every name to its rightful owner." Richard collected the cards without comment. He scanned them once, then placed them side by side. The contrast between the sentences was stark, revealing more than any argument ever could. He nodded toward a small device resting beside his plate. With one controlled movement, he pressed a button. Mara's voice filled the room, unmistakable and unfiltered. "I just need access for a little longer. She won't notice. She never checks closely." The recording continued, detailing dates, account names, contingencies. Evelyn's fork slipped from her fingers, clattering against the plate. Mara's face drained of color, as the reality she had denied out loud finally spoke for itself. Richard stopped the recording. "These statements," he said calmly, gesturing to the cards, "will be archived as sworn declarations of intent. This recording completes the evidentiary chain." No one argued. There was nothing left to say. The next morning, the year turned. On the first day of January, Richard signed a revised will. The document was thorough, precise, and irreversible. Evelyn and Mara were removed as beneficiaries in full. Reinstatement was conditional, contingent upon complete restitution and compliance with every legal mandate already in motion. There would be no appeals based on emotion or blood. The house in Pine Hollow, the same one that had locked me out on Christmas night, was transferred into my name. The conditions attached were explicit. It could never be leveraged as a family asset, never used as collateral for obligation, never weaponized as leverage again. The final proceeding took place quietly, attended only by those who needed to be there. When Richard handed me the key, his grip was firm, his gaze steady. "This isn't a reward," he said. "It's a correction." I stood outside that house later, the key cold in my palm, staring at a door that once represented exclusion. It looked smaller now, less powerful. Ownership hadn't given me triumph. It had given me clarity. Family, I had learned, is not a license to harm. Love is not proven by erasure. And strength does not come from enduring everything in silence, but from choosing the moment when silence must end. As I turned the key and stepped forward, I understood that the most important thing I reclaimed wasn't property or inheritance. It was myself. Thank you for listening to my story. If you stayed with me from beginning to end, I'd love to know where you're listening from. Please leave a comment, and if this story moved you, don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories like this.